We are visiting with Rodger Winn in his wonderful organic vegetable garden in Little Mountain, South Carolina. Rodger, this garden is a marvel to me. And how did you end up with a full-time job and a full-time garden?
It wasn't planned that way, but I've always had a garden. I just can't imagine living and not having a garden. It used to be a small plot, about 50 by 50, but each year it just began to grow. And I gave a talk actually in Kentucky with a group, Appalachian Heirloom Seed Conservancy, probably 10, 12 years ago. And a manager of a seed company that I now grow for was there, and she asked me if I would be interested in growing for her. And then that's what actually propelled the garden to where it's at now, growing for others so they can have seeds of these old-timey varieties to grow.
What are the advantages of the heirloom and heirloom seeds?
Probably the biggest advantage is there's more choices for taste, color, and they're better suited to a home garden. A lot of these varieties aren't well suited to the commercial market because they don't ship well, but our commercial market lacks in flavor, whereas these old-timey varieties have outstanding flavor, and that's probably the #1 quality. So growing for a backyard garden or a small market stand, these are just perfect. They also have a much longer production period. A lot of your modern varieties mature within a couple weeks period so they can have a big crop, go to market, and be done with. These can go for pretty much the whole summer or definitely a much longer period of time, which is ideal for a home garden because you don't want, 100 tomatoes or 100 cantaloupes at one time. You want a few over several weeks.
Well, let's start with the tomatoes. And this year, you grow some tomatoes for your own heirloom use in pots and have them kind of separated, I understand.
That's
but
right.
let's talk about the tomatoes that you're growing for the seeds and how you actually grow tomatoes. Everybody wants a great garden tomato, and you've got a pretty good scheme.
Well, a variety I'm growing this year is called Old Virginia. It's a mid-sized red slicing tomato, nice acid tomato. But I believe in pruning. There's a lot of controversy in whether you prune or not, but prior to growing and keeping plants pruned and tied up, I had a lot of problems with fungal disease, bacterial problems. So it shortened my crop. And it's been trial and error for the last 20 plus years growing tomatoes, and for the last several years, 8 or 10, I can grow a crop and not have any fungal problems whatsoever.
And walk us through that process of how you keep them moving up and keep pruning them.
Basically, when I set the plants out, I remove the lower leaves, set the plants out. In a couple weeks, the plants will double in size up to about a foot tall. Any side shoots that come on, I take off, and the bottom leaves. So you end up with a plant that's kind of bare from about 6 inches down. Then I heavily mulch. Another couple weeks, it'll double in height again, and again remove any side shoots that are on there, leaving about 2 main stems. I put poles and I run wire, and then I tie the plant up. And as it continues to grow, depending on the size of the tomato, large fruited tomatoes, I don't leave but 2, maybe 3 limbs. Smaller fruited tomatoes, I'll leave 4, 6, 8. And I'll just selectively remove limbs that are in the way or just to limit the overall growth. But I still get tons of tomatoes, and I don't have the problem with the foliar disease.
And you're pretty thrifty. I see that you keep this garden mulched, and you talked about mulching the tomatoes with how many bales of square bales?
It takes 500 bales of straw to cover this acre, and there's usually a few left over that I will reuse towards the fall.
And the twine that comes on them is perfect for
Yeah,
the
I
tomatoes.
specify from the guy who bales mine not to use the synthetic fiber. I want the natural sisal twine because I do use it to tie up beans, tie up tomatoes, and then at the end of the season it rots and goes into the ground. So I don't want something that stays.
One of the things I see here is what we used to call cantaloupe or muskmelons. I'm confused, so explain that controversy and explain what we have actually here in your garden today.
This is a true cantaloupe. What we call cantaloupes are actually muskmelons, and they get that name because of the fragrant smell. Muskmelons are great for a beginner gardening because they tell you when they're ripe. They'll change color, they'll slip from the vine. But this is a true melon, which means you have to look at the little tendril. You have to use other indications.
Just like a watermelon?
It's just like a watermelon to know when it's ripe. This variety is called Nordic Harms. They don't get the yellow netting. This is going to be a dark green. They're typically heavily lobed, still about probably a little smaller than your average sized cantaloupe.
What's the taste like?
But super, super sweet.
Oh.
And actually, this is not one where you can sit down and eat a whole melon because the sugar content is so high it'll begin to make you probably a little sick. So this is definitely a dessert melon where you can have a couple of slices in a. They're not real popular because they don't ship well and they have a fairly short storage life. But
that's why we want to grow these things in our own gardens.
that's right.
Now you've got beans down the middle, so as soon as something finishes its production, you're not going to waste that space.
No, these cantaloupes, they're at the point of bloom, and just last week I set out a variety of beans called Louisiana Purple. It's a pole bean variety. So in another week I'll put the poles up. By the time these beans are halfway up the poles, these cantaloupes will be done as far as I'm concerned, because I would have had my seed crop and I'll probably just pull the plants up. They would put on a secondary crop, but I need the space.
That's right. And then also this year you've got an okra that you said is a new one, and it's got a great, boy, it's a healthy looking okra.
It's called Fife Creek, and it's commonly called a cowhorn okra or a bullhorn okra. They're slender pods and they come up and they curve over like a cow's horn would. And probably one of my favorite varieties. I got another one that I particularly like. But it is a very robust plant. And something unique about okra, all parts of the plant are edible. And actually, back in the 1800s and earlier, the leaves were sauteed and used as a green. They're high in vitamins and nutrients, and we have cooked them. The real fuzzy leaf varieties don't have the texture for
that you would
eating,
enjoy.
but this one right here would be good because it doesn't have that real fuzzy leaf.
You've got some unusual helpers in the weed department in this garden. Tell me about those.
I do. I have some cotton patch geese. They eat nothing but grass and small weeds. Once the weeds get up to a certain height and size, the broadleaf weeds they don't care for, but they love grass. And so they work continuously during the day, just going through the garden, finding any grass and pulling it up and keeping it mowed down.
Rodger, you have an event that has a funny name, Splat, which I feel like it could be Splash because I'm sitting out here sweating in your garden. But what does Splat stand for, and how did that evolve?
It's just an acronym I came up to call my annual event, and it stands for South Carolina Piedmont Lycos persicum, which is the Latin name for tomatoes, annual tasting. And it started as an event because people would ask me, what does this tomato taste like, or what does it look like? And it's hard to explain different tastes and flavors and all the different types of tomatoes they are. So I started having this event. This is the 11th year, and it grows each year. But it's a way for people to bring tomatoes that they grew. I'll provide tomatoes that I have, and people can sample and see what all the hype is about heirloom tomatoes, which is the taste.
And if people would like to know more about what goes on up here in Rodger Winn's garden, what's the best way to find out?
I do have a website. It's rodgersheirlooms.com, and that's Rodger with a D, R-O-D-G-E-R-S, heirlooms.com. I also have a Facebook page, and it's Rodger Winn, or you can look at Rodger's Heirlooms, and it'll come up. Send me a message, ask any question you want, I'll try to answer it. Email and buy that website is probably the best way to get in contact with me.
All right. Well, I've had a wonderful time. I look forward to all my visits with you and your family, and thank you for letting us come to the garden today.
I thank you for coming out.